Hello, I'm Eric Cytrynbaum, and this is the BC COVID-19 Modeling Group's COVID model projections for November 25th. Oh, November 24th. But the video is coming out on November 25th because I was just too busy to do it earlier. I will skip over this. This is going to be a quick version, but here's a little information about our group and who's involved in generating these reports. Here's their overview. So, case rates continue to decline in BC. We're going down at about a 2.5% per day. We still have slightly higher cases among kids under 10, but not like we were earlier in the fall when we had that spike. So all regions are showing declining case rates now, as predicted or projected in previous reports. But the Northern Health region has the highest case rates per person still. Our short-term projections predict continuing decline in cases and hospitalization rates, which is good because it's been slow to come down. Vaccine uptake has been slowing, although that's going to change soon when the under 12 vaccinations get started, which will be, I think, in this coming week. And we have a cute animation to show, which is really a compilation of some of our previous graphs showing that in communities with higher vaccination rates, we have lower COVID rates. So this is our local evidence for vaccination effectiveness. And then a new plot, a new analysis where we're showing that vaccination effectiveness does not seem to have decreased over the last 3 months in BC, indicating that at the whole population level, we seem not to be seeing immune waning. And finally, some words about new variants, although not the newest variant. The report came out a little bit too early to include any news on the B11529 variant. Okay, here's our standard overview of the whole pandemic. And as you can see, as I mentioned in the intro slide there, we have cases finally now coming down after that long plateau after measures were put in place late in August. So not a lot to say here. And you can see here, as I mentioned, that early fall spike in kids under 10. And you can see that that's really come down, even though it is still, that population is still higher than the over 10 population. But that's a lot better than it was. And will get better as vaccination for kids gets started. So this is just a quick look across all the health regions and health authorities and health regions in the province. And you can see that the flattening and decrease is pretty much all the way across the province, with northern still staying as high. All the scales here are the same, so you can see the northern region has some of the higher rates still. It is coming down, but still slowly. So here we see some old fits from our October 7th report from Dean Carlin, and you can see that the data ends here around October 7th, and from that point on, in fact, well before that, back to this dashed line here, the transmission rate was considered to be constant. Whatever measures put in place in late August caused, the model assumes it caused a change in that transmission rate, and from then on, the only thing that's changing the transmission rate, the reason for the turnaround in this growth, really has just to do with the growing immunity in the population. So not just people who are newly vaccinated, but people who were vaccinated in the past, and their immunity is just gradually building with time. And so if we jump forward to now, you can see that with the exception of some of these minor outbreaks, we're pretty much falling right on track with those projections. So in other words, vaccination, the immunity from vaccination, that even though we're not vaccinating many people now, the growing immunity from the past few months has been enough to bring the growth rate from very close to zero down to minus 2.5% per day. And looking at the healthcare demands, so you can see here the fits to the cases, and that's the same as what I was just showing on the previous slide. And using the model that Dean has been using for quite a while to translate from cases into hospitalizations or ICU, you can see that both the ICU occupancy and hospital occupancy is climbing above for reasons that are not entirely clear at this point. All right, so here's our vaccination update. As you can see, there's a lot more green and red now than when we started this whole vaccination process. Some interesting things to note: the younger age cohorts here, so 18 to 29, 30 to 39, 40 to 49, have crept above the 50 to 59 and is even catching up to the 60 to 69. And this wedge here looks like it's creeping down to, what is that? That's about, that right there is 25%, so that's under 12% left unvaccinated. So that's good, except that the increase in vaccination is really, really slowed down. Obviously, that will change for this age cohort right down here, which is essentially unvaccinated, but we'll begin getting vaccinated soon. One thing that I've realized about this plot is it's actually a really nice place to talk about what the transition from epidemic or pandemic to endemic will look like. Right now, most of the infected individuals are, the infection is mostly running through the unvaccinated, although some vaccinated individuals are obviously getting sick as well. But what's going to happen is we will gradually have people who got vaccinated earlier out here will gradually have a waning of antibodies and will be able to get sick more easily. And that will lead to loss of this green. So imagine this green here fading back to gray. And we'll have a wedge here that will gradually move in this direction. And this side of the wedge is not going to move forward by vaccination, but it'll move forward by infection. And so we'll have a small wedge of population that are either never vaccinated or vaccinated and have had their immune system waning, so they no longer have the antibody protection. And this wedge will just circulate. So it'll be here initially, and then as people get infected, it'll move, and you'll gradually see that wedge move around the circle. And that is the moving window that will correspond to gradual lower infection rates in the population once the virus has become an endemic as opposed to an epidemic. So here is another view on vaccinations. You can see this is the percent of the unvaccinated in each eligible age group who are vaccinated in a given week. So in other words, the percentage decrease in the susceptible fraction of the population. And you can see that there was a jump up in vaccinations after the announcement of the vaccine card, and then again, so that's this here, and then again after the beginning of the enforcement of the vaccine card, and a smaller bump here corresponding to travel vaccination requirements. Okay, so we've seen this plot before. This shows how the vaccination rate in a given community relates to the average number of cases per 100,000. And you can see these are all communities from all across British Columbia, each of these dots, and the little black tail is an indication of where they were, what is it, I believe a week ago? The line shows vaccination progress in the past 2 weeks. So let's say this community here was here in the vaccination count a little bit below 80% and has since moved up above 80%. And what you can see, this is a linear regression to that set of data, and you can see that the closer you get to 100% vaccination, the lower your average daily case rates per 100,000 are. And let me show you a cool animation of this over the last few months. So let me just set that up. So here is that same plot, but shown now with shapes and colors to distinguish each of the communities so it's easier to follow them. And you can see this animation, which starts off in July here. And then through August, the rise of Delta led to cases increasing across the province. But you'll notice that the rise was more dramatic at the left side than at the right. Now, as time goes on, all of these community symbols are moving up and to the right, not vertically, but horizontally to the right. And you'll notice they stop having those sudden outbreaks and general rise. And you'll notice that here. Let me run through that again. You can see here it's about it's pretty flat everywhere. And then you see cases on the left half shooting up as Delta increases, and you have outbreaks throughout communities. But the outbreaks are generally in communities that have, let's say, under 80, under 85% vaccination coverage. And the black line through there is a regression, the regression curve that I showed in the slides. what we see here is a new analysis from Sally Otto. And so what you're seeing is the relative risk of infection between comparing an unvaccinated to a vaccinated individual. And you can see that since September 1st all the way through November 15th, that risk of infection has remained largely constant, somewhere between, the dots here go somewhere between 7.5 and 11, but the regression line is fairly flat. And the similar thing for hospitalization, although the data is a little bit more scattered, you can see that even for hospitalization, we haven't seen a change either. Now, we would expect to see a waning of immunity against infection because of antibody waning. And then there's more of a question about whether hospitalization risk would increase with time. But we're actually not seeing either of those. So despite lots of reports that indicate that there is waning of immunity happening at the and this is at the population level, not at the individual age group level. So this doesn't say that we're not seeing an increase of cases or hospitalizations among, let's say, the elderly, but that's not a strong enough signal to be picked up in this analysis. If you look at the entire population, we're not seeing a strong indication or any indication of that waning. Okay, here's a summary of the Delta subvariants that we're seeing in Canada. Two in particular, AY.25 and AY.27. So these are subvariants, so there's other strains of Delta out there, and you can see it in orange here. This was, I guess that's the ancestral strain of Delta, which is prevalent in other places, but the variant that we saw for the most part rising with our Delta wave was the AY.25. So an analysis of the selective advantages of these two puts the additional growth rate over other Delta strains or other Delta variants at between 2 and 6% per day across the provinces. So that indicates that our wave in July was actually a little bit stronger a wave than other jurisdictions elsewhere may have experienced with the original Delta. All right, so here is an update for Alberta. Again, Dean is now using the hospitalization data because case data he found through that testing analysis I discussed about a month and a half ago is not so reliable. Not sure if that's still the case, but hospitalizations are his main fit now. So you can see he's fitting the hospitalization data and finds that the model is now deviating from the actual cases, but that's kind of expected given that the testing data in Alberta does not seem to be so reliable anymore. The good news there is that clearly hospitalizations and ICU occupancy are both coming down. Similar story in Saskatchewan. We're seeing a continual decrease in cases, hospitalizations, and ICU as well there. So this slide shows Dean Carlin's analysis of what's happening to trends over time in Canada, the U.S., and Europe. And this half of the slide here is digging back into our October 27th report. What you see in the plot here, for example, the yellow dots are European countries, and the position of a dot is determined by, well, in this direction, it's determined by its daily growth rate 4 weeks prior to the report, and this is the daily growth rate at the time of the report. And so let's say a country down here, this one here, would have had a relatively high growth rate of over 6% per day 4 weeks ago and is now come down to about 1 or 2. So relative to this black line would mean unchanged growth rate. And so being far below it is good news, being far above it is bad news. So you can see here in October 27th, during when this report was put out, you can see Europe, a lot of the European countries are quite far above their prior values. So many of them are more than 5%, growing at a rate 5% greater than how they were growing previously. But the American and Canadian states and provinces were largely similar or below where they had been 4 weeks prior. And so now if we look at an update on that, what's happened, you can see here on this side that a lot of the yellow dots that were up here, There's many fewer, so they seem to have moved down, and you can see a lot of the US states have moved up. So that means that their growth rates are higher now than they were 4 weeks ago, and a few of the Canadian provinces as well. So this slide provides an interesting overview of trends across several countries, as well as through the BC health authorities here in the first panel. So you can see here, with the rise of Delta, the interior had really high rates. And you'll notice here we're looking, all of these plots are daily cases per 100,000 population, so they're all normalized to a standard population size. You can see here the Northern Health Authority had a prolonged peak through the fall. And overall, this is BC's trajectory here. You'll notice down here we have the rest of the provinces, well, BC included again in blue, but you can see Alberta and Saskatchewan, who had these large peaks through the fall with serious pressure on their hospitals. And you'll notice the scale here. The Northern Health Authority up here was around 40 daily cases per 100,000 population. Saskatchewan was similar at its peak. Alberta was up almost to 70. Now looking across, here are some U.S. states, and I believe Dean has grouped these regionally. This is sort of northeast states, and they seem to have similar trends going on in all of them, with this turnaround in late October with a rapid rise, which is echoed in Europe as well. And here are some states from the south of the U.S. Also grouped, and you'll notice their ongoing peaks here, or not even peaks, they're still climbing, are in the range of where Alberta was in September. And Louisiana is here at 130, which is really an enormous peak by our standards. Looking to Europe, Belgium, France, Ireland, Netherlands, UK, you can see they're also going to these very large case numbers per 100,000, and well over 140 here. This is Czech, Hungary, Poland, Slovakia, and Slovenia. So you can see that whatever's going on there, maybe this is seasonal effects, not really clear, but it sort of puts into perspective what we're going through here in BC. All right, so let me just summarize the points of this report. So the COVID-19 pandemic in BC, following our projections from October, is now declining at a rate of about 2.5% per day, which is great news. Vaccination rates have slowed considerably, but we're still seeing an impact of that vaccination at a community level, as you saw in that cool animation. We are not seeing a population-wide indication of waning of vaccination, which is good. And that's not to say that there aren't populations like the elderly who might be at risk for a greater infection, even though they've been vaccinated. And then the 2 Delta subvariants that we've seen and have been reported to be slightly faster growers, those are AY25 is the one we've already seen. So it's not really a big risk for us. What we'll have to report on in our next report will be this now labeled variant of concern, the new one, which is the B11529. And I'm sure we'll have something to say about that in our next report. Alberta and Saskatchewan, things are going well there. And the US and Europe, many jurisdictions there are seeing rapid growth. There's some turnarounds in Europe for sure, but it's still problematic there. And we have our fingers crossed here in BC that we don't see that rapid growth arrive here, especially with winter setting in. Okay, so that is our report for November 24th, with video coming on November 25th. Hope to see you at our next report, which will be maybe before the holidays this year, but we will see how things are going. Okay, take care and be safe.